welcome. Sorry for a little bit of a delay. Thank you for your flexibility. The good news is votes are done for a while, so now we can follow through on the hearing all the way through, so that's a good thing. So welcome to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission's hearing on how global innovation and technology are strengthening the rights of children and youth through education. Our witnesses today have traveled many from very long distances, from Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, Toronto, originally Turkey, so grateful to have you all here in town as well. I'd like to thank you for taking time to share your expertise with us on a very important subject. The work of human rights is at times discouraging because we seek to shine a spotlight on mass violations taking place around the world. But today our desire is to highlight some of the most positive and important developments in the field. In the midst of deprivation and oppression, there are organizations implementing revolutionary ideas that are strengthening the rights of millions of youth around the globe whose lives are besieged by repression, war, and poverty. Of those affected by human rights abuses, children are often the world's most vulnerable demographic. They comprise more than 50% of the world's refugee population. UNICEF maintains that deprivation of education fuels cycles of inequality that undermines the potential of individuals and societies. Humanitarian emergencies and protracted crises currently disrupt the education of over 75 million children in 35 crisis-affected countries. In these countries, over 17 million school-age children are refugees, approximately half of which attend primary school and less than a quarter of which attend secondary school. Girls in crisis-affected countries suffer disproportionately as they are 2.5 times more likely to be out of school than boys. Global technology companies, NGOs, and individual entrepreneurs are developing original creative solutions that are responding to children and youth in these crisis-affected areas and empowering communities to teach the fundamentals of developing such as sharing, collaboration, and inquiry. Innovative ideas allow people within these contexts to access the knowledge needed to foster holistic development strategies and to advocate for their own rights and needs. The United States is often involved in these efforts by identifying private sector entities to implement aid through grants, and also by establishing public-private partnerships that are characterized by joint planning and resource contributions. The United States must continue to utilize these partnerships along with cutting-edge technology to strengthen the rights of vulnerable populations. Today, we have invited a distinguished company of experts who are working directly at the intersection of human rights and innovative education strategies for youth. I look forward to hearing how these strategies are providing solutions to some of the world's most intractable problems and how the United States policy can best strengthen these kinds of efforts. So again, thank you all for being here, and it's my privilege to recognize Co-Chairman.
Thank you very much,
Jim
and I join my esteemed colleague and Commission Co-Chair Randy Hultgren in welcoming all of you here today, the distinguished witnesses to this hearing on defending the rights of vulnerable children through education and play. Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to education," end quote. And that, quote, "Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. And it shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups," end quote. These ideas are reiterated and elaborated in the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. These are lofty ideals under normal circumstances. They are enormously more difficult to achieve for the most vulnerable of children, those affected by natural disasters like earthquakes or floods, or caught in armed conflicts, or those who have been forced to flee their homes due to violence or persecution. According to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, humanitarian emergencies and protracted crises currently disrupt the education of over 75 million children in some 35 crisis-affected countries, and that is an astonishing number. As a father and the brother of 2 public school teachers in Worcester, Massachusetts, I know how important education is. I hear about it all the time. It lays the groundwork for people's lives. It informs our social, political, and economic participation. Education can be incredibly empowering, and it is tragic when children miss out on learning because of circumstances entirely beyond their control. The thing about kids is they grow up fast, but the crises and conflicts that are depriving children of their access to education can take a very, very long time to sort out. The conflicts in Burma, Sudan, Colombia, and Syria come to mind. So we need to find ways to educate even when there are massive disruptions in kids' lives and we don't have time to lose. This challenge is the reason we're here today. I look forward to hearing from our distinguished witnesses today and learning about their experiences. I am especially interested in the lessons from those experiences, the best practices that they've identified. I would like to hear what difference it makes to use a rights-based approach in developing innovative educational models. And I would like to understand how a child's right to education intersects with other rights, especially the right to food. You know, food security can be both a cause and a consequence of violence and conflict, and hungry kids have a hard time learning. So how is that link being addressed? So I want to thank you again for being here today, and I yield back my time.
Thank you to my co-chairman. We have two great panels that are going to be presenting for us today. First, grateful to have Christopher Fabian with us. He's a technologist who co-founded UNICEF's Innovation Unit in 2006 with Erica Kochi. He currently is the principal advisor to UNICEF Ventures, a team which looks at emerging technologies in the service of positive global change. In 2015, he led the launch of UNICEF's Venture Fund, the first fund of its kind in the United Nations, which invests in early-stage frontier technology like drones and the UAVs, data science and machine learning, and digital and cryptocurrency. The Innovation Fund, which was $11.2 million, has made over 30 investments in 26 countries. Chris's teams have worked on infrastructure platforms for low infrastructure environments, including award-winning work on RapidPro, an SMS-based information system with more than 3.5 million active users in 35 countries. Chris is currently focused on scaling UNICEF's work on data science and drones. UNICEF Ventures has invested in MagicBox, an open-source data analytics platform that combines data and engineering from companies like Amadeus, IBM, Google, Telefonica, and others to produce insights and new scientific methods that help organize and make better real-time decisions. Chris lectures and has also been recognized in 2013 as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. Chris, great to have you here. Thank you for your work and look forward to hearing your testimony. Can you turn on your microphone?
There we go. How about that? Thank you to our co-chairs, to Representative McGovern and Holtgren. And it's always impressive to hear the work that UNICEF does and the statistics that we talk about from other people. So thank you also for that, that opening, because I think it frames the conversation really well. And I think that there's a possibility to talk about some positivity in the world. I wanted to sort of frame it in a larger and hopefully not too existential question about what's coming in the future and how we can use some of the technologies that you mentioned in the opening, Representative Holtgren, to maybe alleviate this inequity that we see opening up in front of us as UNICEF. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, said something interesting about a month ago. He said the future of humanity over the next 30 years is filled with more suffering and pain than it is with joy. And he said that as a reflection actually on technology, on the trends of technology in terms of automation and job loss that we're going to see, on the movement of people to cities, and on all of these debilitating kind of second-hand effects of a technological revolution that's coming, and how it can possibly open up more inequity than it solves. And I think that is important for UNICEF as a 70-year-old organization with a focus on equity, on ensuring that the children in the bottom quintile of income have the same access to opportunity and choice as everybody else does. We have this new field opening up in front of us, which is a digital and a technological field of equity, which is something we don't have that much experience in. UNICEF obviously has offices in 130 countries. We have 12,000 staff working, 88% of them in the field, and really working on solving those issues at that bottom quintile level. And when I joined UNICEF I came from private sector and technology, I didn't know that much about the organization, but what I did know was its vast reach. And I think that's important as we look at the problems that we see kind of opening up in front of us. In the space of disasters and emergencies and the effects on children, there are a few areas that we are learning about as an organization. There are 55 million kids who are on the move because of violence. And it's not a number that's getting smaller. I was lucky enough to be in Germany last week at in Hamburg, where they have some of the best refugee integration programs in the world. And nobody thinks that this number will shrink over the next few years. So there are issues like that. Like you've got 55 million kids with no sovereign government to represent them. And UNICEF, as an organization that was built 70 years ago, is built to deal with sovereign governments. You have a Ministry of Education, a Ministry of Health, in a country, and that's who we deal with. You have statistics that come from a Ministry of Data, Science, Statistics, and so on. And that doesn't exist if you're one of the 55 million kids on the move. That's, for us, that is an existential question. How do we adapt to that world? We're also in a world where you've got about 500 million kids who are at risk of not getting the right food and nutrition because either there's too much water on their land or there's not enough. And that's not a situation that we were built to deal with either. And as you said, that there's a direct link between lack of early childhood nutrition and educational outcomes. And we know, and we've proven over the last few years at UNICEF, that not only do you have physical stunting where a child's body doesn't grow physically, but if a kid doesn't get the right mix of nutrients in the first few years of their life, their brain also doesn't develop full cognitive capacity. Which means that you have a country like Malawi where you've got 60% stunting. It means that 60% of the kids in Malawi will not be able to solve the problems that the generations before all of us have laid out in front of them. That just will not be a cognitive ability. We have diseases that are spreading faster than ever, and we have also the problem that in the education institutions that we work with, we're often not teaching skills for the future. So if you look at a country like Malawi, the main economic, there are about 18 million people in Malawi right now, 50% of them are under 25. That number will grow to 40 million people in the next 20 years. Main economic driver is a coal factory that's being built, which no matter how big you build that factory, will not provide jobs or access to opportunity for the number of young people who will need it. And that's a struggle for us because as we've built our education systems and our ways of working with learning, we've built towards a future which no longer exists. And Tony Lake asked me, we were talking about sort of education recently, and he said, Chris, I think you're missing the point. He said, instead of teaching kids the skills they need for jobs, we need to start thinking about how to teach them for a future without employment. And I think I would actually just present that as a challenge for us to discuss today, because to me it worries me a lot. And how do we look at a future? There was a great op-ed by Kai-Fu Lee in the Times this weekend, this Sunday, that talked about what job loss will come from artificial intelligence and automation, and how the brunt of that will be borne by poorer countries, where there's a large number of jobs right now that are held by manufacturing industries that will be gone. And sure, you have 1.5 million truck drivers in the US that are going to not have a job, but in countries that provide most of their workforce with labor opportunities through kind of basic automatable tasks, the effect will be devastating. That's all the depressing stuff. And then the jokes come later. UNICEF is lucky, I think, to be able to see this changing world and to be able to interact with the actors and create a space for equity within it. We do work with, as was mentioned in the beginning, we work with partners like Google, like Amadeus and Telefonica, who are able to give us a sense of the world that they see. And if you talk to a big technology company right now, they also see this world of automation, but they see a world of data. And that's another thing that's unfamiliar for us as a legacy organization. There are more people on Facebook. There are now 2 billion people on Facebook. There are more people on Facebook than there are in China. There are more people on Tencent, on all the apps and chat apps on Tencent than there are in India. And these companies, these mega companies, are now providing services that were being provided by sovereign governments. Facebook knows who you are. Facebook knows if you're going to break up with somebody 2 weeks before you break up with them. Scary fact. You hear the nervous laughter behind me? They're like, it's because you're clicking on people's photos and you're having different interactions. They're gathering all that data. And the pair of shoes that you looked at follows you around online. That identity, if you have 250 friends on Facebook, you meet a basic set of know your customer requirements as well as you do, in most bank basic KYC checks, which is only a kind of anyway, we won't talk about banks and their KYC requirements. The ability for a company to provide something like identity, to provide cash transfer, to provide education, those are services that we as UNICEF were used to working with a government to negotiate. And now we see these corporations that are doing that. So we have a set of opportunities, I think, in front of us that can help us bridge the gap between these awful possible futures and the needs of children around the world. And I would like to highlight maybe 3 areas where we as UNICEF have looked at technology and sort of seen how we can bridge what might be a widening gap. One of them is a clear realization that if you can't count things, you don't know what's happening and you don't know where to direct services. And UNICEF has done that with nutrition in the past. And I'm sort of carrying this around. This is a MUOC band, a mid-upper arm circumference monitor band. This is a band for looking at the upper arm circumference of a kid. Between 0 and 5, their upper arm stays pretty much the same. So you wrap this around a 5-year-old's arm, and if they're healthy, well-nourished little kid, it's in the green. It's a healthy, happy kid. Moderately malnourished is in the yellow. Sorry. And severely malnourished kid is in the red. So that's what the upper arm circumference of a malnourished 5-year-old looks like, which is tiny. And this is a fantastic tool that was developed in the 70s and 80s for gathering data on nutrition. But it doesn't connect very well to the internet, and that data isn't available in real time. So while this can help diagnose something immediately, it can't necessarily tell us what's happening in real time in a situation of famine. We think that there are tools that can do that can point to those needs. We are working on a project using facial recognition and some of the most advanced artificial intelligence to do the same thing, but looking at a kid's facial features. And you can see a body mass index from a person by looking at their face. And you can do that with a kid as well. So what if we could turn the ability to do this one kid it's really hard to weigh a 3-year-old and to measure them vertically because they wiggle a lot and they're all over the place. But what if you could take a photo of 100 kids and see who needed immediate care? And that's the type of intervention that technology allows us to do. But I'd extend that one step further and say that if we're thinking about nutrition only as calories, 1,500 calories per day gives you a pretty healthy person. What is our information diet? What's our information poverty as well that we need to work on? And I think these issues are applicable, and the solutions to them are applicable in the US as well as elsewhere. But how many kilobytes per day does a kid need to be informationally nutritive, to have a sense of their possibilities and their future? And how many of those kilobytes are kind of Kardashian kilobytes? How many of them are Wikipedia kilobytes? How much do you need to be able to write back those kilobytes? And it's the same thing with food. You can have as much cake as you want, but that doesn't necessarily make you a healthy kid. And UNICEF is looking at how we can understand both kids' physical nutritional status more quickly, but also their informational nutritional mixture. And we're working with partners of ours. We've got a project to map every school in the world that we're working on with Project Connect, which comes out of the satellite manufacturer OneWeb. And if we know where schools are, we can do a bunch of things. First of all, we can direct satellite connectivity to those schools. You can also direct food to those schools. So I was in Kenya a month and a half ago, and there's a famine in northern Kenya. And often when we send food for school feeding, we don't know exactly where the school is. A country may know where 30% of its schools are, but not exactly. And so it's in that direction, somewhere in that district. If you know exactly where something is, you can create the logistics networks that you need to optimize a supply chain and direct food. And so that's a set of work that we're doing under the kind of guise of information poverty. A second leading on from that is the work around data and data science. It's clear to us that in the world where Facebook knows everything about you and Google knows even more, we can use that data for good as well. During the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, we were able to use the information coming from our partners about where people were moving in order to predict where a disease would spread. We replicated this with Zika recently, and the results that came out of our team mirrored the results that CDC produced on Zika cases in the US. But our team's data science work came out about 4 months earlier, which means that by using people's mobility, by looking at where people are traveling, because diseases travel where people travel, you can actually get ahead of things. So in a world where diseases spread more quickly than ever, we're actually able to see where people are moving and position our messaging and our health centers in a way that optimizes the small number of resources that we have. And I think that's applicable in the case of refugees as well. If you're a Syrian kid who's traveling through Europe, and you have no number that identifies you, you maybe have 5 different sovereign registrations as you go from country to country between Syria and maybe Germany, and you fill out the same form over and over again. And the form is filled out for you in many cases. If you're a 14 or 15-year-old Syrian, though, you do have one number that sticks with you the whole time. And it's not your phone number, because you switch out your SIM card in every country. It's your WhatsApp number. It's the number that you signed up for in Aleppo or in Damascus, and that number lets you connect with your friends and family on the refugee trail. And that's important. My mom came to the US as a refugee in the late 40s, and they had almost no ability to connect to their family, the Polish family that was here when they arrived. For a Syrian kid in Europe, that WhatsApp number is a lifeline to their family and to resources, and that's a tool that we as UNICEF have that just wasn't available 10 years ago, if we know how to use it. And finally, I just would highlight a little bit of the work that's being done on specifically the space of learning. And I don't quite know the answer to Jack Ma's provocation of what do we do in this dark next 30 years. We've been very impressed with some of the work that Norway has led on in getting crowdsourced and kind of community-built solutions to education and learning problems. There's a game called Etam el Wahish, Feed the Monster, that the government of Norway created through a set of partnerships that teaches basic literacy and numeracy to kids through a basic phone. And it's a fun game, you can play it, you can learn Arabic. If you're a 5-year-old, you can learn it much more quickly than I can. And you can play it on your phone as you're on the move. And having that access to continuity and to some sense of achievement does a lot to create a sense of possibility and opportunity for you. We've been also very excited by the work that's being done on vocational training in emergencies. If you go to Zatari camp in Jordan, now you'll see youth centers where young people are being trained not in specific vocational skills, but in the skills before those, the creative skills, the playful skills, and the cognitive skills that you need to collaborate in a world where we don't know what jobs will exist for them. A lot of that work is being pushed by the UNICEF offices there with our partners, by the Ryan Foundation, and Declan Ryan's been very involved in looking at the next generation of skills for young people. When you see kids do that sort of abstract creative work, it opens up a bit of light into this dark future. And then finally, back to this question of information, we've seen the ability of young people to report on their own needs and tell us what they need, rather than us thinking we know. And anybody who was a teacher, I'm a reformed teacher, anybody who was a teacher or has teachers in the family knows that most of the time kids know pretty well what they need to learn. They just might not be able to express it exactly in the way that a Ministry of Education or a school board wants to hear. UNICEF has developed platforms like UReport. And UReport is a system that lets a kid text in, send a text message, and we can aggregate those messages in real time. We have about 3 million UReporters in 25 countries. And when we send a message out to them, we can see what they're saying. These are young people, and it's all a free message for them. We can see what they're saying in real time. In Liberia last year, we heard that there were cases of sexual violence in schools, that teachers were asking for sex in return for final grades. We sent out a message. We were working with the Minister of Education, and she was ready to move on this if she just knew where. Like, in what district was it worse? Because you can't send investigators to every school. And we sent out a message to about 70,000 kids in Liberia over text. Is sexual violence a problem in your schools? We immediately got results back. From 70,000, we got results back from 13,000 kids in 10 minutes. Of those 13,000, 11,000 of them said, so that's 80%, 82% of the respondents said that this sex for grades was in fact a problem in their school. And you could see it in real time on a map of Liberia. You could see where the problem was the most pronounced. That led us to work with the ministry to set up helplines, but also to set up the operational responses that we can do if we have that information in real time. So that was both police and legislative work that happened within days. And if you imagine the ability of a lawmaker to make laws based on that type of information and that sentiment in conversation with young people, that's a very different world. The way that we've tried to explore some of these new areas is through the Venture Fund. And this is a new vehicle in UNICEF. It allows us to make bets on technologies that we don't understand fully, that are emerging, and that we think will hold great value for the organization. Yesterday we were talking with the World Bank about blockchain. And every time I think I understand cryptocurrency, I know how little I know. But it's clear to us that the ability to have this distributed ledger which stores something like a child's educational results in an anonymous and encrypted way with permanence could be applied to refugees. And we're funding a small project in South Africa that's doing just that. And these types of bets through the Venture Fund at the $50,000 to $100,000 level aren't something that our organization would usually do. UNICEF isn't, I wouldn't describe it as a risk-positive organization. We're an old bureaucracy that works in that kind of way of making sure that our choices are sort of checked off on by everybody, and that's how a bureaucracy works anyway. In order to work with the future that's coming, that's more uncertain than ever, we need some vehicle to open up a bit of risk. And the fund lets us do that. We have tests going on in Malawi now for using drones to provide Wi-Fi, and the first drones flew this morning out of Kasungo Airfield. Those drones will drop Wi-Fi to places like potentially to refugee camps where Wi-Fi doesn't exist or isn't consistent in its coverage, to allow young people to access the types of information that I've described. And building those types of opportunities in Malawi is interesting because not only does it solve a local problem, it also brings young Malawian entrepreneurs together to work on technologies that aren't the coal factory. And in fact, we had the first Malawian paraglider come to UNICEF 3-4 weeks ago. His name is Godfrey. He's about 25 years old. And he's a paraglider and a drone pilot. And if you want to hear somebody talk about how much drones and aviation engineering can change a country, Godfrey's the guy to do it. And what he said is that if this can become a way to bring big companies, the companies that we as UNICEF have access to a place that's as difficult to work in as northern Malawi, and to solve problems there, it can not only solve those problems immediately, but create a cohort of young people who are thinking very differently about the future that is to come. So I just wanted to present the work that our team is doing, that our organization is doing. I think it's a great opportunity to open this discussion up both nationally and in international areas that we're working in, and happy to answer any questions for you. Thank you.
Sorry, just figuring out scheduling. I've got a group that I'm hosting of Swedish diplomats that are talking about innovation as well. So I've got to run and just say hello to them in a few minutes, but I just want to make sure my co-chairman could be available. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions and then hand it over to him so I can run up and say hi real quickly. But first of all, thank you. Thanks for your work. The thoughts, I mean, so many thoughts come flooding into my mind as you're testifying, but one is just the power of the change that's going on right now. Power for good. I mean, so much opportunity, but also power for disruption and some real challenges that we're going to face through that. To me, so much of my passion for the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission is finding out what we can do as members of Congress to have an impact for people who need help, who need someone to be a voice for them, or to help maybe get information out about them, those who kind of feel like they're getting lost or left behind. So I guess, to me, a fundamental question is, what can we do? What can we bring to our colleagues, 433 other colleagues here in the House, 100 over on the Senate side, reaching out to the administration? What do you think government's role ought to be in some of the challenges that we're facing? What are the things that UNICEF is doing well that we can just come along and cheer? And what are the things maybe that you need help with? I'm encouraged by some of the companies that you're working with, amazing companies, but I know they've got limitations as well, or only interest maybe in certain parts of this. So what do you think we should be doing, need to be doing? Where can we have the best impact with limited time and limited resources too, but wanting to do good for as many as we can around the world, especially with this powerful technological advances that open up many opportunities, but also bring many new challenges?
Sure. Thank you. I think there's probably a book in the answer to that question somewhere to be written. But
let me know when you write it, if that's okay. And I'd like a signed copy.
Let me take a vacation. I think that there's some very simple things. One of the most important things that we see as we engage with our partners is to make the point that these are not problems for people far away, that the future is a problem for everybody. And when we're building up systems like Magic Box that look at data and information flows, that can help understand where Zika is going to move in the US, as well as it can, Ebola in Sierra Leone. And I think that making the resonance of the future felt here is something that you can do and your colleagues can do. The second is to keep a firm finger on this idea of information equity and technological equity, that it's very possible that in 15 years we end up with two worlds: a world of people who are very lucky to have access to everything, and a world of people who just do not. And that's a dangerous world to live in. And you can see the beginnings of it all over. So I think making sure that as we work with companies, we push them a little bit and say, you as a major social network are great at getting your message across to the top 2 quintiles, but who's working on getting it to that bottom one? And what they'll say is, well, that's not where our money is. That's not where our ad dollars. And you say, sure, but your money also isn't in inequity. And it's a very dangerous world that you create. So how do we make a kind of business argument for that? And I think that's another valuable thing that can happen here. The third thing is we're always happy to have more collaborators, whether it's in ringing a bell for the work that's being done in the field in UNICEF country offices, or convening some of these partners together. So I think showing, I'm very lucky and honored to be here today, but I'm presenting the work of 12,000 people, and showing the work that's being done in some of the most difficult parts of the world in a way that is palatable and accessible to companies and to other partners is also an important role that can be played here in DC.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'm going to ask one more, if that's okay, and then I'm going to hand it over to my co-chairman. But wondered if you could, I think one of our greatest challenges in this place is volume of information, just the challenge of just keeping up. being able to stay on top of all of our committee work and bills and other things like that. So I get it, that myself and my colleagues are overwhelmed. We talk about drinking from a fire hose, and we feel like that every day. But I do think this is important. And so I would just ask maybe if there's one or two things that you are most excited about with either UNICEF or with technological changes that we can share with our colleagues, and maybe one or two things that scare you to death. And I know you've talked a little bit about it, like just some of the malnutrition. And I would say with that measuring thing that I don't think Jim and I want you to do it on our biceps. Maybe Jim, not me. But sobering, boy, when you see just the reality of malnutrition and the real impact on physically, but also mentally, and the challenges there. So anyhow, wonder if you could, just from your experience, from kind of the top of your thinking, of one story, one thing that you say, this is so exciting, everybody in Congress needs to know about this, and this is so sobering, everybody in Congress needs to know about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we had a meeting with our management team and the new head of UNDP last week, and Tony Lake, our executive director, highlighted information poverty as something that is both timely and important to work on together. I think it's an exciting ability to be able to quantify the type of access to information that a young person has, and look at, if you could only give a 14-year-old anywhere in the world 1 gigabyte of information, and that was it, and their whole life, you can just give them one flash drive, and they could somehow magically read it. What would be on that? Having that type of information allows us to work here in the US in places that are less connected, or where people have less access to services, and we can better understand what services are needed, but it also allows us to understand how to uplift an entire population or group who might not have access to connectivity. So I think that is an easy concept. It's kind of expressible in a sentence, and it's kilobytes of data per person per day, just like calories. And it's something that we can work on together as a global good. I think that's an important thing. The thing that scares me the most is I think that is what I said a minute ago. If we don't act together and act quickly, we will end up living in a world that's fine for some of us. And I think it's very dangerous to live in a world that's fine for some of us and horrible for others. That the ability to create bubbles, and if you look at where job loss will happen, it won't happen in big cities. Big cities are going to be fine, big urban areas, anywhere in the world. It'll happen in semi-urban and rural places. That bubble that we create is going to be one of the most dangerous things for humanity anywhere. And not understanding that changing world, and a world that starts to look a little bit post-sovereign, where companies control access to services, access to identity, will really put us on the back foot. And if we have a chessboard, and if humanity keeps backing itself, and we had 64 squares to start, and we're maybe we're at that last row now, I'm not sure that we have much space to move backwards anymore. So I think that taking a stand that this is about a connected world, and a world where inequality and inequity anywhere affects everybody, is another simple and sort of resounding narrative that we can tell together.
That's great, very helpful. Thank you so much. I'm going to yield to my co-chairman and excuse myself. I'll be right back.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the work of UNICEF and the UNICEF Innovation Unit. My friend Marty Rendon is here. I appreciate all the great people and all the wonderful work that you do on so many issues. And this is a very profound, big discussion. And I have long believed that we ought to, that education is not only a right for everybody on this planet, but we have to make sure that we actually ensure that everybody gets an education, because in the developing world, there's no future if you have a population that's illiterate, that doesn't know how to operate the most basic technology. And I've also learned along the way that education in and of itself is not enough, because if you don't have enough to eat, then you can't learn. And so you can have all the drones flying all around that you want, and all the high technology equipment you can muster to try to get education into people's hands. If they're hungry, they don't learn. And so, we've been trying to expand this discussion to, in a more holistic way. These are all the different pieces that need to be in place for, in this case, for what you're doing to actually work. And I think, you talk about the future. You've got to come to the wrong place in some respects, unfortunately, because Congress is not very good about thinking in terms of the future. We react. and that's a real problem. I always joke with people, Hillary Clinton likes to say it takes a village. I say it takes a plan. I mean, there's just not a lot of plans out there, that actually are dedicated to like ending hunger or dedicated to universal education. And there's, all these great companies, as you mentioned, that are investing in new technologies, and all these great startups going on in various places in the world, including in places, where there's a lot of conflict and where people are refugees. But I guess my question is, the scalability of all of this, and the sustainability of all of this. And it's hard for me to see that without the United States and the world community saying, okay, we're going to put some resources on the table. I mean, we get it, and we think this is not only the right thing to do morally, but from a national security point of view, as you mentioned. I mean, if we have two different worlds, it could be a pretty scary place. I think we're getting to that point, but this is every bit as important as investing in more military hardware to send to some country. How does what is the buy-in from the developed world have to be, from the wealthier nations? I mean, to do this right, to avoid the very dark scenario that you alluded to. What does it mean, and how do we get administrations and the international community to to say, okay, here's the plan. Let's argue at how we're going to fund it, but here's the plan.
I think that in order to create a plan, we need to really look at some of the fundamental assumptions that exist and be brave enough to question them. I was in eastern Uganda a few years ago, and we were driving, and there's a town called Maroto. We were driving outside of that town on the way back, and there were a few people panning for gold, and I can, grown up with this romantic notion of 49ers and panning for gold and that whole thing, and it's actually not a very awesome thing to do, it turns out. So we stopped the car and we said, let's talk to these people, and we met this young woman. She was about 16, and her name was Lucy, and she was panning for gold. And I didn't know what language she would speak, if it would be Kiswahili or Ugandan language or English. She spoke a little bit of Kiswahili and also local language. And so I was asking through the interpreter, so what does gold look like? She said, when you find it, and how much do you make? And she said, well, I make about the equivalent of $10 a month. 16 years old. And I said, so what does gold look like when you find it? And she said, it looks like seashells. And I thought, there's no ocean anywhere near Karamoja. She learned that in a school somewhere. Right. She went to a school for long enough to learn that analogy and that metaphor of a seashell, and she's panning for gold in the dirt for $10 a month. And the fundamental thing that we're thinking is we've got to build more schools and get more teachers in them and do this thing and expand it and expand it. And I don't think we sometimes stop to look in the mirror and see what the skills are that we're teaching. For the developed, and I'm not sure about the phrasing of developed and developing, but for rich countries to look in the mirror is also a difficult thing. And for us to understand in Europe or in the US where the holes in our education system are, and where the spaces where we need to create space for creativity and compassion and collaboration rather than some of the hard skills that are being taught, isn't just an issue for other places, it's an issue here. And I don't know how to make a global plan for that, but I think that's one thing that needs to happen. The second is we tend to be a world of export in general, of export of ideas, and Silicon Valley is going to have the next great idea for Malawi and so on, or Geneva is going to fix the problem in South Sudan. And I think we need to flip that. And UNICEF was built also in this world of sort of verticality. And if we start to turn that a little bit and look at a world where we invest in solutions in the places that are the most difficult to work in, I think we create a stronger network of solutions. The constraints are more difficult to work within, but the stuff that comes out is often better. And I'll give an example of that. In South Sudan, right before this last long-term conflict started, we had a group of engineers from Khan Academy, the online learning platform, and they had called us up and they said, hey, we're interested in developing our platform further. This Khan Academy, it's cool and it lets you, watch a video and do your lessons, and it's great in the US. They said, could we use this for UNICEF? And we said, well, maybe, but why don't you fly out to Juba, to our innovation lab, and why don't you build a piece of software there? Okay, and these guys got on the plane. They were out in Juba, 2 weeks later, And there you're getting internet, an hour a day or something. And they built the next version of software with South Sudanese engineers and with teachers, and they built something that was robust and strong and worked there. The thing that they brought from Silicon Valley failed immediately. By building something locally, they built something that can then scale up, and that platform that they built in South Sudan is now being used in refugee centers in Greece and is going to be scaled up in the Middle East as well. And so I think that by investing in local solutions, investing in the creation of options locally, even though it's more expensive at the beginning, we create better sets of solutions than if we try to create one thing and send it out from the US, for example. And that's very much baked into UNICEF's equity approach.
No,
So that's our sort of.
And I think that's a great approach. I mean, that's, I've done a lot of work on the issue of school feeding. I traveled to countries where I would go into villages and I would ask young people, like, what is school like? And they tell me they don't go to school. And why not? Well, either because there's no school in the neighborhood or in the area, or if you're a girl in some of these countries I visited, it's not so important. And so it's more important for you to, in some of these areas, for them to work on the farm or whatever. And so we helped develop this program called the McGovern-Dole School Feeding Program. Not named after me, McGovern, but George McGovern and Bob Dole. But what we learned is one glove doesn't fit all, all right? So it has to be local. So it can't be a program designed in Washington and say, okay, here's the model school feeding program for everybody. You go out and do it. No, everybody's different. I mean, everything is different. And the other part of this initiative was to make it self-sustaining so that the community buys into it and basically owns it and doesn't have to rely on a U.S. subsidy or U.S. food for it to continue. And we learned that little things like, if you not only will more girls go to school, but sometimes you get even more people go to school if you gave the kids a snack to bring home. All these little kind of innovative things. We learned that, when more girls went to school and there was pressures, on the local system to build bathrooms. Just things that we don't always think about here in Washington. But I guess the point is kind of what you're saying is that, look, education, in one community, what is appropriate for an education curriculum in one community may not be necessarily a good fit for another community. And you need to develop it locally because people who live in these places are going to know where their future is. And it may not be what we think it is. It may be, they may know better than we do what will work. So I get all that. I guess I don't want to, I'm really intrigued by all this. I'm just trying to figure out how do we make it all work and how do we have a happy ending here and what has to happen. But again, how scalable are the education-related startups that you've identified? Have you seen positive models for public-private partnerships, as a means to increase scalability? Do the countries buy into them? What happens in these refugee camps where there's, where we're not dealing with countries where, how do we? Because I'm going to tell you another thing. The one thing I was, and I'll end with this, and I'll get your response. But about a couple of years ago, I was in Gaziantep in Turkey with Senator Tim Kaine, and we were meeting with some of the people who headed up programs to deal with the incoming refugees from Syria. And there are all these little neat programs that we get to see, all very, very impressive. But I'll never forget, one of the leaders in the community said to us, our biggest worry is education. Our biggest worry is that there's no schools for these kids to go to, and some of them are, like 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And we're worried that the time that it's going to take for you to figure out the solution is going to be so long that they'll be 25 years old. We're going to lose this generation, who will not only not be, the productive in terms of solving problems, but might be the problem. And so I'm just trying to figure out, how do we ensure that whatever seems to work stays and grows?
On this trip to Germany, I met a very smart 29-year-old Syrian engineer, and he was doing an apprenticeship at a firm in Hamburg, a freight forwarding firm. And they've been incredibly open about opening up these apprenticeships to refugees. And he said, we sort of talking, and at the end of the panel discussion, he's like, I have to say, it's great to be an apprentice here, and I'm so grateful for it, but I did this all before. I did this when I was 18. And he's like, it's wonderful. I'm so lucky. Don't take this the wrong way. I'm so lucky to have this opportunity, but I was an apprentice already. And I've been through that, and now I've just lost a decade of my life. And I don't know that there is a really happy ending. So I don't know that this story that we're living in right now has a really glowing kind of end at any point. I think they're less devastating endings. One of the things that we've seen scale is the ability to teach people to work together and to create sort of these entrepreneurial, collaborative skill sets that don't exist in formal education. So there's a platform that we've worked on called Upshift. Upshift started in Kosovo, in our innovation lab there. And in Kosovo, we worked with this group of kids who, when the first time we took them into a shopping mall, they all took off their shoes. And they were from the poorest parts of Kosovo. They were too afraid to get the floor dirty by tracking dirt on it. They took their shoes off on the outside of the shopping mall. And imagine going for a job interview. As 17, you've never been in an office. 85% of kids in Kosovo going for job interviews had not been in an office building before. That platform is about how you get kids to interact and to get them to have that same sense of opportunity that like a startup pitch day has here. It's scaled to Montenegro. It's now being used in Myanmar and Vietnam and in Lebanon. And it's a set of protocols for how you train for that type of optionality. I think that's good. I don't think that's good enough. The second thing is we need data. We don't have a good set of data about any of these needs. We have census data and stuff that's 5 or 6 years old, but we don't have the real-time data about what people need in these most difficult circumstances. And so that's why I was talking a lot about data science. And I think we need to be better at knowing what populations need before something happens. So what is it that a bunch of refugees in Germany need? The Syrian refugees are going to have different sets of needs than the Afghan ones, but we don't have any real-time way to hear about that. And if we don't have that, then we're providing a block of education to people, and it's not necessarily right for both groups. So I think that a big investment in data science is also important. And finally, we need to be able to pay for these services in a way that's accountable and transparent. We're investing in a company, this blockchain company that I partially understand in South Africa. I totally understand it. It's one of our investments, of course. Of course we know what's going on there. They are both paying teachers, paying early childhood development centers through the blockchain, through the Bitcoin blockchain, but also registering kids through a separate blockchain. And that allows them to have transparency and accountability. We hope. This is it's an investment, so we'll see how well it works. But to have transparency from bank account to payment of teacher, and from students' record in school to students' graduation. And that type of transparency is something very new as well. So I think there are some bright spots, but they really have to do with data, I think, and some of these technologies and the ability to scale that stuff faster than the problems are scaling.
Well, I appreciate it, and I think, look, this is all fascinating and it's all important, and I would just echo something that the co-chair said. I mean, for here, we need to find ways to be, you have to help us identify specific ways to be supportive, because this is like C-Spot run here in Congress. I mean, it's like, because, I think we need to figure out ways, of concrete things that we can do to help be a little bit of wind at your back on this. Because I think everything you said is absolutely right. I mean, if we're going to provide education, it has to be relevant to the community you're dealing with. But we need to make sure that people all over the world get the basics and have access to education. But it's, we're grappling with some of the same issues you're talking about internationally here, right in the United States. I mean, in my own community where that I represent, some of the communities I represent, we're talking about these same questions. So, but I thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Really appreciate your work. And please pass our thanks along to your colleagues at UNICEF as well. We really appreciate it. We're going to transition to the second panel now, if that's all right. Well, to our second panel, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful to have Christopher's input, but really looking forward to hearing yours as well. And I think maybe some more fun good, encouraging things that are happening, and we need both here. We need to realize the sober reality of challenges we're facing, but also be encouraged by some really good things that are happening. So it's my privilege to introduce our next three panelists. First, Denny Johnson. Denny Johnson is founder and chairman of the board of Kids Around the World, which is headquartered in Rockford, Illinois. The NGO was founded in 1994 and has built over 650 playgrounds around the globe in 64 countries. Over 500 volunteers help install 125 playgrounds just this year. Locations target difficult areas of refugee camps in Iraq and Lebanon, and other sites include Peru, Ecuador, Haiti, Swaziland, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and many other places, North Korea, others. Feeding the poor is also a focus. To date, Kids Around the World has packed and shipped over 20 million meals for children who are desperate for proper nourishment to learn and grow. 3,400 teachers have been trained so far this year on the use of oral methods of storytelling in churches and schools worldwide. Off the record, Denny is a great personal friend, one of my dad's best friends. So great to have you here, Denny, and I really do respect you and appreciate your work. Lindsay Groves is the Vice President for Program Development and Evaluation at Right to Play. Lindsay joined Right to Play headquarters in Toronto, Canada in 2008. Since that time, she has overseen complex multi-country, multi-regional partnerships. In her time with Right to Play, Lindsay has traveled and worked with Right to Play offices, civil society partners, governments, and multilateral agencies in Lebanon, Jordan, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Mozambique, Tanzania, Ghana, and Liberia. Lindsay now oversees Right to Play's program development and evaluation team, which includes leading global program partnerships, global policy, advocacy, global program development, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and our North American programming. Last but not least, Hakan Habib is here as well. He's a father and a hacker. He has studied mathematics and management science. In 26 years of professional life, he worked in corporate sales, distribution, manufacturing, and international finance. In 2000, he came across concepts of positive change and has been a missionary for them ever since. Since 2004, he's been organizing scientific tournaments in Turkey for students between the age of 6 and 19. He is the founding co-chairperson of Science Heroes Association, a Turkish nonprofit. SHA volunteers have reached 17,000 students from 45 cities. Mr. Hadib was selected as a change maker by the Sabanci Foundation in 2013. Based on these experiences, Mr. Hadib has given 2 TEDx speeches and wrote an article, A Holistic Model to Empower Humanity. He believes his approaches can help build sustainable peace in some of the most volatile parts of the world. First had the chance to meet him in St. Louis at the World Championship first Robotics World Championship just a little over a year ago. And grateful that you could be with us, all of you, grateful. I'm going to recognize Denny Johnson first to give your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the invitation to be here today and to represent Kids Around the World and to talk about the important issue about education and play. My thanks to the Commission's co-chairman, Hultgren, and also McGovern. We really appreciate your taking on this awesome task and chairing that commission that I think is very important to have heard and learned new things. And I appreciated Christopher's testimony. Very interesting and very informative. I thought he did just a great job, and it might be a little bit hard to follow Christopher as number 2, but my hat's off to UNICEF and the great job that they're doing. Play actually really plays into education. Some surveys have been done in Japan and China, which shows that if an hour is set aside for education, it would be good that if the kids played for actually 5 or 10 minutes unsupervised before they began to learn for another 50 minutes. So the kids learned better if they had an opportunity to play and to get the serotonin working in their brains. They were more receptive and able to learn as a result. So play is important. Kids Around the World exist to bring hope to kids and to that are living especially in very challenging circumstances. Our programs are focused on leveraged play, nutrition, and also in training teachers as well. We base our training for teachers on the oral method because we know that 75% of the world learns orally. They don't learn by books. They learn because they heard stories or are able to tell stories. And so we try to encourage the teacher to do a great job in telling stories in their educational process. To date, we've built 650 playgrounds, as you mentioned, in 64 different countries, 50 of them actually in the United States, because sometimes they say, are you doing anything for the kids in the U.S.? And yes, we are. Our organization has shipped over 20 million meals to kids and trained thousands of teachers. I think we've trained about 3,400 teachers so far this year, and the number of meals that we will do this year will be over 2 million meals that will be packed by various organizations, churches, and other groups. Our playgrounds. Park districts all over America are changing out their playgrounds for new ones. This is some requirements because of the insurance or liability, but they're getting rid of the old playgrounds. And what the problem is that they're taking these playgrounds, the old playgrounds, and putting them in the dumps, which is filling up our landfills. And we try to say there's another way to use those playgrounds. We'll take them. And they call us and ask us to come and get them. And so we send out a volunteer crew that goes and takes those playgrounds, brings them back to Rockford, Illinois, or our offices in California, and we refurbish them. And we use volunteers, students that are struggling with their life issues, plus local prisoners in some cases, and even addicts in recovery. And they help us repaint the playgrounds, put new bushings on, put new seats on, put new slides on if necessary, and then prepare them to go and be shipped all over the world. Play effects in playgrounds affect on kids. Play teaches kids fundamental social values of skills, conflict resolution on the playground, and I think we've all learned that as we grew up. They learn fairness, trust, collaboration, and they even learn leadership. Somebody says, let's go play on the slides, let's go do this, let's go do that. They learn leadership when they're even that young, and that's a good part of it. And they also end up learning forgiveness, which is important. I'm sorry I hit you with the swing. I'm sorry I bumped you in the slide. Kids learn their moral values really between their birth age and their age of 5. That's when they learn how to forgive each other, how to be nice to each other, how to grow up together. The playground sets those avenues. I often hear my wife tell me that she feels so much better after she's run in the morning. And she gets the same rush of serotonin that the kids get when they play on a playground. This chemical in the brain is released as the kids play and exert energy. And another thing that's so good about playgrounds, and I think all of you can remember the days when you played there, because you felt like there was a feeling of belonging. And you felt like you belonged to the kids that played with you on the playground. I could remember my playground nearby was Churchill Park. Well, that playground became a place where we all belonged. And you took that network many times years later, and your feeling of belonging. When kids play together on a regular basis, they feel a sense of that belonging. When accompanied by their parents, who may help them and push them on a swing or catch them on a slide, they feel loved and part of the family. Kids that learn, they learn better if they feel like they're part of something. They belong to a family, they belong to a church, they belong to a club, even a boys club, girls club. This helps them in their learning process as they feel good about themselves. When the war in Sarajevo ended, USAID asked us to build a playground for them and for the children of this war-torn city. That site that they selected was where the Christians, and they had a hill advantage, they shot at the Muslim kids where they ran through the hand-dug trenches to go to secure food and attend their schools, makeshift schools. We filled those trenches. We took away the old battered cars, and we built a beautiful playground complete with benches for moms and dads to watch their children play. The playgrounds brought joy and fun to those kids, but also it helped them to mend the hurts of war as Christians and Muslims sat together socializing while they watched their kids play. And they began to become friends because of the playground setting. And they socialized just as though the war never happened. Many dads are from families today in the USA and around the world are missing from the family today. And a play area grants dads an easy way to do something with their kids. They can't all play sports, they can't all be good at sports, but they can go with their child to a local playground and feel the bonding that occurs there and enjoy their time together. When we build a playground, we look for local volunteers to help, giving them the feeling of ownership. This was true in Brovary, a suburb of Kiev, and this is the effect of playgrounds on a community. The local mayor loved the thought of receiving a playground. Since the first playground was built, local entrepreneurs and the city has continued to build more playgrounds and parks. Years later, the town has been transformed into a model city. According to the mayor, the playgrounds were the catalyst, creating a community with healthy values oriented to children, resulting in many young people choosing Brovary as a place to live and raise their families because there was parks everywhere in that particular city just outside of Kiev. We work with many partners, and this is the effect of playgrounds on nations. In Haiti, after the earthquake, we built 50 playgrounds working with Compassion International at their orphanages there, including one for Greta Van Susteren and Greta's home and academy there. 10 projects were developed in northern Iraq in collaboration with Samaritan's Purse. These child-friendly spaces became safe places for and environments where Iraqi, Kurdish, and Yazidis children could be impacted and taken away from the threat of ISIS, and they could play, interact, and learn to laugh again. In Lebanon, we developed 3 separate play areas. Our partners there are reporting great success from the effects of the playground with therapeutic value, and are able to open up new ways that parents are able to focus on their children's needs. Then the ways have been difficult for them as they've been involved in a flight movement and environment. 3 more projects are scheduled to be developed in Lebanon later this year. We receive routine reports from partners on how the children have suffered from PTSD-induced anxiety attacks and anger outbursts, and they begin to relax and trust and return to their child-appropriate behavior as a result of play. Finally, our work in Jordan just began last year with 2 playgrounds built with partners serving the Syrian refugee communities there. 4 more projects are scheduled this year in Jordan, one of them being inside Zaatari Camp, the 5th largest camp in Jordan with a population of over 80,000 Syrian refugees. 60% of those are under the age of 16. And by the way, it was mentioned about Kenya. Kenya has the largest refugee camp of over 200,000 refugees in that camp. And Melissa Fleming, who heads up the communications of the UNHCR, she visited our office recently, and she suggested that maybe we could be part of the building of a brand new camp in Kenya, working with the UNHCR. Organizations like Compassion, Samaritan's Purse, World Vision, USAID, UNICEF, UNHCR, including the local communities, have all helped us, and even the local communities donate sand, land, and labor. Finally, over the last 22 years, it has been an honor and a blessing to help children and their families in great need around the world through a simple gift of play. Partnering with our U.S. shareholders, these include businesses, churches, schools, and individuals, kids around the world finds that our model of harvesting and repurposing American manufactured playgrounds due to their quality, safety, and durability provides the very best overall value to the recipients, which are the children and the communities. I like to think that these big, beautiful, multicolored playgrounds as ambassadors from our country to theirs, ambassadors for peace. Inherent within each are the principles that shaped our great nation, the universal, God-given, unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which includes play and playgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Denny. Next, Lindsay Groves with Right to Play. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Holgren and Chairman McGovern, members of the Commission. Thank you for coordinating this important hearing and for inviting Right to Play to share our experience driving forward an innovative approach to child rights and education, an approach focused on play-based learning. A little closer. Okay. Right to Play is the largest global development organization focused exclusively using the power of play to transform the lives of children and youth affected by war, poverty, and disease. We train teachers and community coaches to harness the power of play to promote learning and development for children and youth, both inside and outside of the classroom. Children are the world's most vulnerable population, experiencing a broad range of rights violations, including being at risk of child labor, physical abuse, sexual violence, frequently lacking access to health care and support services, and critically lacking access to quality education. While education is a fundamental human right for children, currently 263 million school-aged children are out of school. Of these, 75 million live in conflict-affected countries. For vulnerable children and youth in fragile and conflict-affected countries, the impact of disrupted education is devastating and affects their ability to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. We are in the midst of a learning crisis, and if current trends continue, only 1 in 3 children will learn the basic primary level skills by 2030. We need new models and innovative solutions to cope with this learning crisis. At Right to Play, we believe that a focus on play-based learning is one innovative solution that is both effective and scalable in ensuring holistic child development and promoting education for all. Play, as enshrined in Article 31 of the UNCRC, is a powerful tool for promoting learning for children and youth and is a major contributor to the development and enhancement of critical life skills that allow children and youth to thrive throughout their lives. Play transforms dynamics inside and outside the classroom by creating caring, supportive, and committed relationships between teachers and students and positive learning environments where children feel safe. Our approach also supports children to have a sense of belonging and agency, as well as a space to reflect and search for meaning. We do this through our experiential approach to learning using a method we call Reflect, Connect, Apply. After a play session, children reflect on their experience, connect their learning to a real-life situation, and apply this knowledge to everyday experiences going forward. In this way, children benefit from the inherent qualities of play, from the key learning of the play session, as well as build critical life skills like self-awareness, self-reflection, communication through their experience of play. Play also allows children to be a part of claiming their human rights. Children and youth in Right to Play programs are found to be more involved in leadership roles in their community, have stronger levels of self-esteem and well-being. One way Right to Play promotes this is by ensuring children's active and meaningful participation in our programs. For example, we promote child-led programming, creating space for children to design and develop their own learning games and that promote and educate children on their rights. We have also supported children to establish and lead child rights clubs and national youth parliaments. For example, in Mali, our youth regional parliaments have mobilized the community to address barriers related to education, such as early marriage, corporal punishment, and child labor. The efforts of one child protection club in particular led to the first arrest of a child trafficker in Mali. The importance of play for vulnerable children and youth in crisis and emergency contexts is particularly significant. According to reports by USAID, sport and play supports children, and particularly vulnerable children, such as refugees and internally displaced children, to relieve stress, restore a sense of normalcy, and heal emotional wounds. At Right to Play, we commissioned a research study of our programming in Lebanon with Syrian refugee children to better understand the link between play and psychosocial support. More than 1 million refugees were officially registered in Lebanon by the end of 2016, with children and youth representing half of that population. Beyond the traumatic experience of war itself, the strain the refugee influx has on Lebanese society filters down to these refugee children, who suffer additional effects of bullying, social isolation, poverty, and a sense of hopelessness. The research study found that the effects were more traumatic in Lebanon than actually the experience of the war itself in Syria. Play can mitigate some of these effects, helping children to reclaim an understanding of the world in which hope and joy are at the center. Underpinning the use of play in these contexts is the idea that when children encounter stress or trauma, their thoughts can change their feelings, which influences their actions. Play can reduce the effects of trauma because when a child is focused on play, these positive actions impact their feelings, which helps transform their thoughts. For example, in our resource manual for psychosocial support in response to the Ebola crisis, a table shows what games to play when children are feeling a particular emotion. If a child or a group is feeling despair, a game based on trust can be played so that they can feel hope. A positive and a negative emotions dictionary helps coaches and teachers understand and communicate these emotions better. Ultimately, research and our experience in programming points to play-based learning as an innovative solution that is both effective and scalable in promoting education for all. Play makes sense for children, and in these contexts where the world is rapidly changing, but especially in refugee contexts and crisis-affected communities, play is the most natural form of learning for children. The United States government, therefore, has an opportunity to better respond to the needs and rights of vulnerable children through a focus on the use of play in 3 very important ways. First, increase funding for children's rights in education through official development assistance for direct aid to basic education, by investing in multilateral partnerships and by funding innovative civil society organizations. Since 2002, the share of education in total over official development assistance globally has fallen from 13 to 10%. And as the largest provider of ODA for basic education, the United States must show continued leadership by increasing ODA targeted for education, especially for fragile, low-income recipient countries. The United States should also continue to show leadership in the Global Partnership for Education, striving to meet its GPE targets in this year of replenishment. Secondly, and most importantly, create opportunities to have children and youth voice be part of decision-making, including children from fragile and conflict-affected countries. For example, create spaces for young people to share their experiences here at Congress, engage youth perspectives in the Congress structure. In this way, children's agency and participation are at the heart of any policy decisions being made about them. Finally, ratify and uphold the Convention on the Rights of the Child, showing global commitment to realizing the rights of children, including the right to education, as well as the right to play. The United States can also support shifts for organizations in other countries, especially those receiving ODA, to operate from a child rights-based approach. This would also have significant benefit for children around the world. We all know children and youth are our future, and it's vitally important that we do everything in our power to ensure that their rights are protected and upheld. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Next, grateful to have Hakan Hadip with us. Mr. Hadip.
Co-chairs, Mr. Haltgren and Mr. McGovern, members of the Executive Committee, members of the Commission, honorable guests, thank you for your invitation. Parts of what I will say may seem preposterous. Some of these concepts are difficult to shoulder. Since 17 years, I'm trying to be a humble servant and share them with great humility. If I do not bring them out now, I will not be doing justice to them. They are the concepts that brought me here. Acting upon them is easier, I admit, than advocating them. Please give me the benefit of a doubt. Can we start with one word and reach regional peace or more? The volunteers of Science Heroes Association have developed certain methods of establishing deep engagement. By sharing our methods and observations, I would like to suggest to you that we can. I should. I've had the privilege of working with children and youth from all layers of the Turkish society for the past 13 years, including the underserved and the traumatized. It has been an inspirational journey for me and for the thousands of volunteers who serve these amazing kids. Once given the opportunity, children become children. Fun, learning, sharing, they find meaning, they inspire others, they engage in increasing the quality of life for all. I will describe a learning experience that has the power to transform and empower the participants, their siblings, parents, colleagues, teachers, and in time, their communities. The experience uses technology. Students design and code autonomous robots, usually using a PC. They use the internet to conduct research. Currently, this activity takes place in 88 countries. What we do differently in Turkey is what I would like to talk about. It is what I call a holistic approach that includes a defined purpose, a set of universal values, and a preferred language, as well as various experiences designed with these specific factors in mind. This model can be replicated anywhere. It all started in 1999. After 7 years in the IT industry, I found myself working on a project to design a better internet service provider and started experimenting with a few concepts. I noticed that an ISP can be viewed as a loyal community. Any organization, any company, in fact, any country can be viewed as a loyal community. Each is as valuable as their loyal constituents. For example, a loyal client would continue to use the same brand or continue to pay taxes. I realized that we all build loyal communities throughout our lives, with or without realizing what we are doing. Your childhood, high school, college, office buddies, or your Facebook, LinkedIn buddies are part of your loyal communities. Yes, some may be more loyal than the others. In short, I said, we each are here to build. I imagined building as a universal purpose of life, one word. Then I questioned, if we are all here to build and build loyal communities, is there a formula? In order to answer that question, I started with the intended last step of loyalty and attempted with no prejudice or assumptions to make my way back to the first step. Loyalty, community, learning, listening, speaking, life, and sincerity are the 7 steps that emerged. I'm skipping the process, but here's how I verify the sequence. The sincerity between your parents produced you, life. They spoke to you, gave to you, they listened to you, received from you, they learned with you. Thus, your family has built a community, and each of you, by being loyal to this community, has internalized building loyal communities or simply building. If you question your best deeds, do not be surprised if you find these steps in action. I call these universal values, a kind of universal interface for any relationship. At Science Heroes Association, we rarely talk about this purpose nor the universal values. However, we notice that each student arrives with these already ingrained as universal values should be. On the other hand, the language we use at our events and how we run our events have been influenced by these ideas. For example, we do not use words that divide, competition, individualism. We do not use words that might incite division, ethnicity, creed, patriotism. We never use the word culture to mean a static state, but only as a set of actions. We do not use a flag nor a national anthem. We emphasize that science unites, once defined as any action that increases the quality of life. 13 seasons, about 100 events, 17,000 students from 56 cities, 26 countries, some 30,000 parents, some 2,000 teachers, thousands of volunteers, and over 100,000 volunteer hours later, I can say we observe the following. Children express themselves freely and feel that they are the architects of our events. They are perceptive and they recognize quality and authenticity. They have strong feelings of fairness and justice. They do not have prejudices. They relish diversity and complementarity. They naturally share, collaborate, and build together. They are kind. They learn from each other. They imagine themselves as contributing global citizens, able entrepreneurs, resourceful engineers, and science heroes of the future. They see strangers volunteering for them, and as a result, the feelings of social solidarity, the chances of them volunteering increase. They are at peace with life and humanity at large. The participants, unless brainwashed by fear or by imposed feelings of victimization, will have no reason to display animosity to anyone. This means if we continue what we are doing with students coming from our neighbors, Greece, Bulgaria, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Cyprus, and expand this circle every year to include the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the Middle East, and other volatile regions, I'm confident that we can help build peace in a bottom-up fashion. In a region historically infested with violence, this is not a bad place to end up for a team that started with one word. The biggest reason for the violence may just be the children and youth and parents have lost hope. Science Heroes Association gives back moments of hope. If our approach works, it will affect generations to come. Our solution is endemic to the region, which is crucial to overcoming cynicism and eroded trust. And our approach is even more valuable where ideological approaches to education worldwide color the content and polarize the masses along divisive lines. We may share the perception that humanity is running out of time, as other speakers have talked about it. A bottom-up diplomacy with holistic tools such as the one described here can complement the efforts that promote, defend, and advocate human rights. It would be my heartfelt wish that the US Congress, the US government, and other governments and legislative bodies, corporations around the world, entrepreneurs, foundations, and other NGOs consider encouraging donations to nonprofits like Science Heroes Association, thus helping assure its survival and building capacity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, each of you. I'm going to recognize my co-chairman.
I
McGovern.
unfortunately need to leave, but I just wanted to just take the opportunity to thank all of you, Mr. Johnson, Ms. Groves, and Mr. Habib. Thank you so much for your testimony, and I'm really so impressed with what you're working on and what you've done. And Ms. Grove, you said that children are our future. You know, I would just add, well, they're 100% of our future, and this is. You know, so all this stuff is so important, and ways that we can be helpful here. And Mr. Habib, I just wanted to say, I think education is not just about giving people information; it's about teaching values and respect, and you know, and it's not just a challenge in difficult parts of the world; it's a challenge here in the United States. I'm editorializing here, but always one of my complaints about education in the United States is that even when we learn history in the United States, we learn a lot about the wars we've fought. We don't learn a lot about the peacemakers in this country and around the world. And I sometimes think that people think that nonviolence and peace are not solutions that don't work. And we've had examples time and time again where they have worked, but we need to teach people these things as well. So, but thank you so much, and I apologize that I have to leave, but I appreciate very much you being here.
Thank you, Co-Chairman McGovern. I want to be respectful. We're a little bit over time. I want to make sure you all are okay with that. If anybody needs to leave, let me know. I think they're going to call votes again in about 15 minutes. We might have about that much time. If that's all right, if I can ask some questions, just again for the record going forward. But again, thank you all. Appreciate your work, appreciate your passion, and echo much of what my co-chairman had said as well of just how important this is. Danny, wondered if I could start with you, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, but I wondered if you could maybe go into a little bit more detail of some of the places you have gone into are very difficult situations,
Right.
authoritarian nations. How do they respond to you? Do you feel like, are you under threat? Is there concern? Are they watching your every move? Do you feel like you and others who are there are safe, or what has been the response when you've gone to some of these places that would question if it's safe to go to?
Sure, thanks for the question. Probably the most difficult place, of course, was North Korea. And there we were invited in by the country leader, and who wanted us to build playgrounds at each one of the orphanages that they had, and they have 23. And so far we've done 11. And we have another 5 playgrounds that are ready to be installed. But when we go into a country, we plan to respect each nation's laws, and we understand that we're invited to them into their country as a guest. And our goal is to take care of the children and provide play material and swings and jungle gyms and the other enjoyable things that they can use. And so we're not so concerned about the politics. And we've been in other difficult areas on the Amazon River where you never know what kind of a tribe you're going to run into. But even by boat, we bring down the playgrounds, but we're very careful to introduce ourselves and not do anything that would infringe upon their rights as a country.
Has that worked well? What has been the response from those countries?
It works very well, and I can usually go into any country and request time before a first lady, and every single time I've done that, I've been able to see them. If I come in with a container load of food, I can't see her. She's too busy. If I come up with a carload of clothes, I can't see her. She's too busy. If I tell her that I've got a playground that we're possibly thinking about installing in her country, she's more than happy to do that, because ingrained in each one of the politicians and dictators all over the world is their reality that they would like to cut the ribbon when you come to a playground opening. And they want to do something for their kids, and that's all good. And we want that to happen, and indeed it's happened all over the world for us.
That's great, thank you. Lindsay, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, I think all of us here would agree how important play is, but we also have talked about just some fundamental challenges, food, shelter, security. So how do we balance that with limited resources? How do we make sure we're meeting those truly life-sustaining needs? But how do we put play in that prioritization and again with limited resources? How do we do that?
That's a great question. So play for us is really the entry point. It's the starting point. And all of our programming is holistic. We realized really early on that we could implement excellent play-based learning programs at a primary school that was intended to increase our enrollment and attendance and increase literacy and numeracy skills. But if girls didn't have a latrine to use when they were menstruating, they're gonna miss 25% of the school year. And that's always been very clear for us. So we work with a lot of other community-based partners, international NGOs, and government ministries, so that when we are working in a particular school or with a particular community, we're looking at all of the holistic barriers that might exist to children thriving and meeting their full potential. Water, sanitation, and hygiene is one. In another setting, it might also be access to hygiene materials or access to mosquito nets, or other barriers that might affect children's well-being.
I would ask maybe both of you, again, if you can start, Lindsay. How do you know where to go? Are you contacted? Are you reaching out? Is Right to Play reaching out to these countries? How do you know where to go and provide this information, to that entry into that, to provide some help to those children?
That's a great question. We operate in 16 countries globally, in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, as well as in Canada and also in the United States. Within our programs, we partner with local ministries and national ministries. So much of our work is very much predicated on what the issues that a particular ministry or particular country is facing. An example, for instance, of how we work in Canada with we work across 88 Indigenous communities in Canada, and we only work by request. So communities actually submit an application form and request the program before Right to Play actually provides any sort of programming in those communities.
Denny, how do you know where to go with your playgrounds? I mean, how do you make that initial connection?
We'll do about 125 playgrounds this year, and rather than telling organizations and foundations and groups where we want them to go, what we found it's best is if they contact us and ask us to come or bring a playground into a certain area. We might find a group, for example, a church that's got a missionary in some country, and they would like a playground for that particular missionary, or next to build a playground. We prefer to build playgrounds next to orphanages and next to schools, because what we found then we'll go to there and we'll build a playground at their request. But what we found, especially in schools, for example, when I was in Niger, there was a regular school, and there was also a school with a playground. They lined up before the school year as to where the kids would go to school. Almost 100%. The kids who saw the playgrounds wanted to go to that school that had the playgrounds. They didn't know enough about education or what they were going to be involved in being educated, but their moms knew. And the playground actually was a draw and an attraction toward those schools because of the playground, which ends up with the great result that you want.
Thanks. Hakan, thank you for your work. You and I share a passion for robotics and all of the opportunities that it opens up to young people. So thank you for your great work in Turkey and other places as well. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, as I am reminded again of the amazing impact that Science Heroes Association has had on so many young people in Turkey. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you have scaled that up. So starting with just a small group of people into something that is affecting so many people. How has that worked? What are, I think, maybe some of the biggest lessons you've learned of bringing it to a larger audience? And then, if I could have a follow-up question as well. We've seen, talked about it, a lot of refugee populations around the world, but also Turkey, I know, has felt that. And so just wondering your thoughts of opportunities in maybe some refugee populations as well in Turkey. Have you had some opportunity there, or do you see some opportunity there?
Let me start with the first question. We started just with our friends, and then a very good a professor was there, and from the industrial design faculty of a famous university, and he said he loved what he saw, and he said, just please continue. You know how many volunteers are needed to run an event. He made sure that his faculty was behind the growth of these events. So they volunteered, and for years we were like groupies, like a rock band. We were going from one city to next for regional events and for nationals. Currently, the people who run our volunteer efforts, they do it professionally for other organizations, so it has grown tremendously. The demand is increasing very rapidly, and we temper the demand because we don't know how much money we're going to find. I mean, every year we go down to zero, and then we have to find a way of building it up again, our bank accounts, that is. And so we temper the growth currently. But still, from year over year, from last year, the growth has been 60%. That's now we're covering aged 6 through 18 with our events. Regarding the refugees, and there's a huge opportunity, to say the least. We've done some work with the refugees, bringing Turkish kids with the refugees, and we've been working on it for the past couple of months. We are in this discussions with the U.S. State Department, U.S. Consulate, public affairs officials, to organize some public affairs, some pilot projects for the Syrian children. Of course, scaling up is very, very difficult in our in what we do, because we are extremely careful regarding quality. As I went through our language, you realize that we are extremely careful to nuts and bolts. Scalability is a problem, but given the right amounts of resources, we can reach the refugees, and not only the refugees, but bringing refugees together with Turkish kids, because that's where the fault lines are.
Great, thank you. I'm very happy to have a colleague of mine, Commissioner Sheila Jackson-Lee from Texas, able to join us. One of our challenges in this place, again, is a lot of demands on our time. So grateful that you're able to come in and join with us. I'm going to recognize you for statement or questions or anything that you'd have.
Chairman is very kind, and I do apologize. He is absolutely right. From the skiff in the basement of the Capitol to the floor of the House, with my committee on the floor and to hear, I did not want to miss this opportunity. I co-chair the Congressional Children's Caucus, and we work with a number of issues. One of our stars, and she's an emerging young lady now, is our 12, 13-year-old who was shot in the head. Now she's a young lady, Alea, on the way to school in Pakistan. And as we saw her as a symbol of children's resilience and their desire to learn. So let me, on the record, thank Christopher Fabian, who I know was here earlier, but each and every one of you, Denny Johnson, and Lindsay Groves, and Hakeem Habib, almost, did I get it correct? Many good friends in Houston who similar background, and we interact a lot, so thank you so very much. I wanted to just put in the record and say again what our witness from Christopher said, and then ask some questions to you. We have a UNICEF chapter in Houston, as there are many others, and we try to work hard on behalf of children and international organizations such as yours. Investments in the health, education, protection of the most disadvantaged children help to reverse a vicious intergenerational cycle of poverty in a virtuous cycle. By giving today's disadvantaged children a fair chance in life, they can compete fairly as adults and help grow their economies and stabilize their societies. It goes on to say UNICEF looks towards new areas as well, where there are gaps growing more pronounced: pandemics, learning, nutrition, jobs, and refugees. So I'd like to focus on the world of refugees and internally displaced persons. I'm a member of the Helsinki Commission and will be using my time as we leave shortly for that mission to speak about refugees, internally displaced children, which can be, or persons, but really the children, because they can be right in their land, and of course, be internally displaced. South Sudan is one of those areas right now, and certainly Syria and other places come to mind. But I want to ask sort of a general question, because you deal with children, and I note that the UNICEF was doing something with innovation. Now we are able to use technology to help these children to equip marginalized youth with 21st century employability skills, so we're able to reach them. But we do know that they're living in those conditions, and so I'd like to hear from you that without what you're trying to do, what do we leave to these children that are either refugees, internally displaced, or disadvantaged internationally? And what hope do we leave for them? How vital is it that we have these programs? I notice, being close to certain areas. And then a second question is, and I want to be clear that the policies that all nations engage in, I could be in Great Britain and be in the Parliament and be adverse to something that they're doing. So I'm going to use the United States because it's important for us to learn that we are part of the global family. For example, if there is a movement afoot to cap the number of refugees that come into the United States, those refugees include children. The refugee policy is usually to deal with the prospective crises that come from around the world. You can't predict a catastrophic natural disaster. You can't predict, you might see it coming, but you can't see the surge of a man-made conflict that then surges and has people fleeing for their lives. So I'd like you to comment on the idea of capping refugees and making it more stringent beyond the security question. Let's put that aside. The common sense is that we all secure our nations, but questions or processes that diminish the movement of people, whether it's in Greece or Italy or whether it's in the United States. Mr. Habib. And impacting children.
There are certain areas within your question that I know about, and others I cannot really answer. But what we notice is the experience children have with at our events. You may be familiar with quality tests. Let's say if they carry what they learn to their families and to their friends, and it doesn't, whatever good the experience does to them doesn't stay with them, but it's carried forward to their siblings, to their friends, to their families. So it's important to include them because they turn around and affect dozens of others positively. So it's very, very important to include the refugees. The other issue, capping the number of refugees, I can't say much about it, but we are all in the same boat, really. The world needs to see signs of hope everywhere. And people talk about 6 degrees of separation, and we are each just a single step away being a refugee ourselves. There could be another Katrina in your neighborhood, and soon you will be a refugee. So capping the number of refugees, I think, sends the wrong signal. Despite security issues and whatnot, We all need positive feedback at the moment.
Thank,
That's all I'm going to say.
thank you. I just want to expand on your point. Teaching one child expands that knowledge or that talent to their siblings and parents or their atmosphere. They could be in a refugee camp, or could be, and it just helps generate information all around. Ms. Groves, those two questions, thank you.
Thank you. In terms of what we leave behind, I guess if this work doesn't exist, a number of years ago, I was in Dolado, Ethiopia. It's on the Somali border. It was the second largest refugee camp in the world. That's now changing with the South Sudanese crisis. And we went because there was a significant challenge with the notion that across 5 camps, 200,000 Somali refugees, there was no organization working with a youth mandate. Refugee camps are often really well run with solid child protection mandates, education mandates, health mandates. But what we were seeing there was no one with a youth mandate. And we went to do an assessment funded by IKEA Foundation, one of our great partners. And we went and we had a ball, and we had one of our great trainers come, and he started, all of a sudden kids started, checking out what's going on. Within, I would probably say 120 seconds, we had 300 kids and youth around. He facilitated one of our play-based learning games, which is about cooperation and collaboration. We had onlookers, we had kids that were laughing, we had kids that were learning, and it was something that had not existed in that space before. And I think for me, that was really what is missing, and it is the joy that all children and youth deserve to have in their lives, that in some contexts is more difficult to experience than others. And that small glimpse, it was there, it was so profound. We've been in that setting now for 3 years, and we've seen transformative change as a result. So I would say that. In terms of refugee policy, I'm a Canadian, flew in from Toronto this morning, so it might not be my place to comment on the United States refugee policy, but I will say this. I think what the Canada's response to the Syrian crisis, what I believe was innovative and what I believe was essential was that it wasn't only on the government to take accountability, it was on the public. And our refugee policy is one where individuals can band together in groups to financially support and provide that emotional support to a refugee individual or a family coming into that country. And I think that was important because I believe it instills the notion that it's not only somebody else's problem to figure out how we're going to solve this issue, it's all of ours. And Canadians had the opportunity to step up, and many of them did.
Very good. Thank you. We have a base of private NGOs who are prepared to step up as well. Thank you.
I bet.
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I've been in refugee camps, a number of them all over, including one that would take me into Pakistan all the way up to Bora Bora. When I was in the camp in Afghanistan, I saw moms come into that refugee camp carrying their mats and a few pots and pans and maybe no mail, but 4 or 5 kids under her toe. The problem is that the arrival into a refugee camp is not just a matter of providing housing or a tent. It's a matter of mom wanting to just get a break from her long travels coming into that refugee camp and to be able to, for example, have a play area that she can have the kids go to so that she can prepare her tent, prepare her household, if you please, and someplace where she knew that the kids were going to be taken care of and not taken advantage of. At a supervised play area, yes. I've also seen that around the world and visiting Zurich in Switzerland and the UNHCR, that their request is, for example, that every single refugee camp has a play area. And they even requested us to do that. In the Zatari refugee camp in that's the number one in Jordan, the number fifth size. That one there is a well-organized camp, actually, and where you think of refugee camps as nothing going on, actually they have barbershops, they have stores, they have all kinds of economy going on within that camp. I'm not sure that America understands what a refugee camp is. But what we ought to understand is that there is a huge need to have it well organized, well equipped with safety for the people entering it, and with a place to play, a place to get educated, a place to get their food, that kind of thing. Secondly, as far as the number of refugees that we ought to allow in, I'm really not prepared to answer that with any certainty. I don't know exactly what the limits are. I do know that some refugees, when they come to America, are not received well, but they deserve to be received well by Americans, and America needs to know that they are our guests and maybe future residents of our country. We need to treat them well, with love and with care, and not with disdain. And we need to speak well of those refugees that arrive on our border. And I'm not sure that Americans do that. We give the impression that we're angry with them that they're here, and we need to make sure that they feel our love. I'm not sure how many, however.
Let me, if I might just finish on this, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you and Chairman McGovern for leading the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. I'm delighted to be a commissioner. I served with Tom Lantos and even had the ability or the chance to serve with him on the Foreign Affairs Committee and did a lot of work during that time on human rights issues. And so we are dealing with, I just want to make the point, and someone may want to comment, because it is dealing with play and education. And we can look at our own schools and our own children. And if we're fortunate enough, being as young as I am, to have little grandbabies, they're grandbabies, so everybody knows how young I am. But they're 2 years old. I'm just amazed when I have the opportunity to see them, the joy of play. It is just amazing. And I have, as the co-chair of the Congressional Children's Caucus, begun to talk in the language that when children go to school, it is their work. We get up and go somewhere, we think we're adults, and we say we go to work. But a child's schooling is their work. And when I say that, all the indicia of making it a pleasant place to work or wanting you to go back should be part of that work. And so I think this hearing is crucial because it entails the joy of learning, as I wanted to talk about little Malaya, who was just trying to go to school in Pakistan. I've been in Afghanistan. I've taken books, school books, to the children in Afghanistan. So I think this hearing is important, and the emphasis is important on how we can best either look to crafting legislation to be constructive and instructive, or as well to make sure that we view this as being very, very important, and that play is very, very important. And in the camps, I'd like to join in that with a play area in every refugee camp. With that, let me thank all the witnesses for working hard to answer my questions. I know Mr. Johnson was getting ready to tap his phone, tap his mic just for a second. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I just, one more thing? One of the problems in America that we're seeing is that, and you talked about the importance of play and play areas in schools in many districts, but we're finding that there's some districts that say you can't have a swing any longer because the swings are dangerous, or you can't have a teeter-totter, or you can't have this. And if you take away all the elements of the playground that kids enjoy, what is there left? And I think that might need to be addressed by Congress and say, you you just can't take all the play value out of a playground because you're worried about the insurance costs or the lawsuits or whatever. That's all I'll say.
Thanks. Good point. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. I'd love to stay longer. Reality is we lose the room at 4 o'clock and it's 4:03. So there's higher powers that control these things. But really grateful for your work, first and foremost. Proud of you, grateful for what you're doing. Want to just encourage you to continue at it. And would ask to keep in communication with us. We want to be helpful. We want to know what the proper role is. We want to be able to share with our colleagues what role we as members of Congress ought to have in making sure that this wonderful access to play and education is available to every child here and around the world. With that, we will adjourn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I was thinking you were opening the doors to bring more crowd into our hearing.
Yeah, appreciate it. I did. Go to school on University of Dayton. But quick question, have you ever changed Jane? Yeah. Can you guess her direction?
It's right here. Thank you. Yep.
Hey, Josh. Hey, nice to meet you. Yeah, let's. I can talk outside 1 second. I gotta get this stuff out.